Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, in which three rabbis from Englewood, New Jersey, each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Rabbi Chaim Pupko of Congregation Avat Torah, and I'm joined by my dear friends and colleagues,
Rabbi Akiva Block, Kilat Kesher,
and Rabbi Daniel Goldberg, Eitz Chaim, the Englewood Stiebel.
To sponsor an episode of the One Pasuk podcast, visit onepasukpodcast.com and click on the sponsorship link. And please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. Welcome back to the One Pasuk podcast. After our extended break over the Pesach holiday, hope everybody enjoyed a nice Pesach. Let's dive right back in. Parshas Achrei Kedoshim. Rabbi Block has picked the pasuk for this week, so I'm going to hand over to him to set us up.
Our pasuk this week comes from the Holiness Code in Kedoshim, where we have a series of tripartite psukim. That's psukim with 3 different sections to them. One of them, which is really quite fascinating and has captured the imagination of the rabbis of the Medrash and the Gemara and commentators throughout all the ages. Lo sikalo cheresh, this is Perek Yutes, Pasuk Yudalad, chapter 19, verse 14. Lo sikalo cheresh, don't curse the deaf. V'lifnei iver lo sitein michshol, do not place a stumbling block before the blind. V'yaresa me'elokecha ani Hashem, you should fear your God, I am Hashem. This is one of those psukim that almost no one takes entirely literally. Certainly halacha didn't take it entirely literally. And I'm curious, distinguished rabbis, colleagues, gentlemen, how this pasuk speaks to you and what you'd like to share with the masses.
I'm very glad that you chose this pasuk because I really have not had the occasion to really sit with it and ruminate on it and think about it. The part of the pasuk that I think gets most overlooked is actually lo sekalel cheresh. So, lifnei iver lo sitein michshol, don't place a stumbling block in front of the blind. So that is then taken as this kind of metaphor for leading someone astray when there's asymmetry of information in any way. But lo sikalel cheresh, don't curse the cheresh is a deaf mute, someone who can't hear and can't also speak. So in a sense, cursing a cheresh is like the perfect crime in one respect, because they can neither hear what you are doing to them, nor can they respond if they are alerted to the fact that you've cursed them, because they can't curse you back. So that's one way to understand the metaphor of not cursing the cheresh. Alternatively, you could view it as a victimless crime, which is to say that if we assume that a curse is fundamentally ineffective, that if I utter a curse, it doesn't do anything. The only thing it can do is rile someone up or hurt someone or offend someone. So the metaphor is not of the perfect crime so much as a victimless crime, where you're not actually going to hurt anyone's feelings by issuing this curse. I think those take us down dramatically different lanes, but if we stay in the victimless crime approach, so the Torah is telling us something extraordinarily far-reaching, which is don't do the wrong thing, even if it doesn't harm anybody. Something like that. I'm still working on how to formulate that in my mind. I just want to articulate that. The Torah is telling us, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's saying, even if what you're going to do will not harm anyone, if it's the wrong thing, meaning if you wouldn't want someone to hear it, if you wouldn't do it in polite society, so you shouldn't do it. It's still kind of just eluding me a little bit, but it seems like abstract, but like extremely far-reaching and like a very firm principle that is so beyond the norm of what we typically think about for Jewish law.
So I was thinking about a question on this pasuk, which I think maybe highlights what you're getting at and extends it, and that is that who's the pasuk really concerned about when it comes to lo sikalel cheresh, don't curse the deaf? Because if a deaf person can't hear it, so then perhaps the pasuk isn't primarily concerned with the cheresh. And that in contrast to lifnei iver, where it's so obviously concerned both by the offender and the victim, perhaps lo sikalel cheresh is more focused on the offender, the perpetrator. Meaning, as you're saying, if it seems like a less victimless crime than other crimes, just remember, right, not just concerned about who is the victim of the crime, who is the subject of the offense. The Torah is just as concerned about the religious personality of the person doing it. And so, you may think, if I'm not hurting anybody, why is this so bad? Well, the pasuk is coming to teach us is that even if you don't feel any real target of what you're doing, it still affects you.
Yeah.
And it still furthers a moral deterioration or something of that sort. But would you agree that perhaps the first part of the pasuk is more concerned with one party as opposed to both?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good reading, that it's concerned with our moral character and not so much about the victim per se. I guess the challenge for me in the way that we're both reading the pasuk is that you would imagine that the pasuk would start out with the lesser kiddush, or it would move towards intensification. So it's like, don't do this and don't even do that. And in the way that we're both reading the pasuk of Lo Sikalel Cheresh, we're both reading it that it's actually it's the more novel idea. So to me, the pasuk should be Lifnei Iver Lo Sitin Michshol V'Lo Sikalel Cheresh. Right? Don't even, right? So that's like a pshat level issue with the way we're reading the pasuk.
Just to add and deepen what the both of you were talking about, the Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvos and the Sefer HaChinuch, really, the Sefer HaChinuch cites this Rambam also. And Sefer HaChinuch, really, his treatment of this mitzvah of Lo Sekal Cheresh is really quite beautiful. He's of the opinion that this mitzvah is more of a mystical, cosmic significance. You might think that this is a victimless crime, but because Vayipach Ba'apav Nishmas Chayim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu breathed life into a person, and Onkelos translates that as Ruach Memalala, that it's the power of speech that is the divine essence of a person. You might think it's a victimless crime, says the Sefer HaChinuch, but your words carry weight in ways that you don't even appreciate it or understand. If you curse somebody, even if they can't hear you, the curses might come to fruition anyway. So it's not just about offending somebody else. It's about using your power of speech, which is the very essence of what it means to be created in Hashem's image, and bringing it out to the fore and using that in a destructive way. So that's what the Sefer HaChinuch says. And he admits that that's a little bit more of a mystical understanding. But then he cites the Rambam, ever the rationalist, who never really subscribes to mystical understandings of mitzvos. And the Rambam says exactly what, in the Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam says exactly what the two of you are saying, which is, this is really about the moral character of the offender. And it occurred to me just reading that Rambam that really every interpersonal mitzvah, whether it's a mitzvah saseh, like tzedakah or hashavas aveda or hachnas hazorchim, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, which is a pasuk just one or two away from this one, any interpersonal mitzvah or avera really can be looked at as focusing on the receiver or on the giver, on the perpetrator or the victim. And it's generally good for us to remember all the time that the purpose of mitzvos are to cultivate good character, that mitzvahs are meant to perfect us as individuals, us as a community, as a nation. And the Rambam says that Lo Sekal Cheresh is another good example of that, that even if the person can't hear you, even if the person will never hear you. First of all, the Sefer HaChinuch has a beautiful line where he says, citing the pasuk in Koheles, that a little birdie is going to take the words and the guy might find out anyway, even if he can't hear you. But besides that, the Rambam says that if a person engages in this kind of talk, it will stain you in ways that you can't possibly understand. And this is always the case. It's not just about the effect it has on the world or the effect it has on other people. Being a good person, even behind closed doors, is important too, just because it's important for us to be good people. And in that regard, I just want to highlight a very brief but incredibly powerful comment of Ibn Ezra on this pasuk, who says, Lo sekal cheresh ba'avur sheyesh lecha koach. Don't curse a deaf person because you can, because you have the power to do so. And I just read that and I'm like, this is about social media culture. This is exactly what it is. We hide behind our keyboards and our screens, and we think that it's okay for us to say what we say, for us to hurl insults or offensive language at other people because we can. Because either we're hiding behind some degree of anonymity, whatever our screen name is, our Twitter handle is, because the words carry less weight, because the person on the other side is quote unquote deaf. They can't see you, they can't hear you. But just because you can doesn't mean that you should, because it's not just about the effect that it has on others. Out in the ether, the words have an effect anyway on society, and first and foremost, they have an effect on you and who you are and the kind of person that you become. And even when the words that you use actually land nowhere, the fact that they're just out in society actually stains you and stains society in ways that are almost irreparable.
So the Bechor Shor actually ends up with a similar observation from a different root. And it's really interesting, actually, because he notes that there's one other pasuk that talks about not cursing someone. And that is, Him lo sikalel v'nasib amcha lo sa'or. Elohim, in this context, referring to judges, to the court, and a nasi, right, and a prince. And what he basically says is, Diber hakasuv b'hove, that the Torah is talking about the most common cases. What are the most common cases that people would curse someone? Well, it's someone who can't hear, right? That's easier. And the people who are responsible to rebuke the masses, right? The leaders, the guides, right? The judges and community leaders. And so the Bechor Shor frames it as the pasuk is specifying the most likely cases in which somebody would curse. But what I think the Bechor Shor is also hinting at is exactly what Ibn Ezra is saying, and that is that judges and leaders, they're public individuals, and it's easy to curse them to your friends because so many other people are criticizing them, and you're not really in front of them at the time, and they're that person, that leader, right? They're almost not like a real person to you. And so it's like cursing a deaf person, because you can curse and trash leaders all you want, and oftentimes they don't know about it, and they're not in a position to respond. And so I think he arrives at the same point.
Very nice.
I'm just wondering, you mentioned how this pasuk like superimposes on V'nasi b'amcha lo sa'or, the prohibition of cursing a leader or a prince. I feel like the rabbinic persona nowadays has expanded beyond like the Daled Amos of our respective shuls. And in order to be a community leader now, you have to speak out more broadly on issues, whether it's with a blog or social media presence or editorials in the paper, or if you're really an effective community leader, can't just speak to your and I feel like what that does is it
creates the pressure to just put stuff out there. And as opposed to, if someone has what to say about a topic, they'll say it. And if they don't, they won't. But if they feel like they have to, then it creates the opportunity to say things that maybe miss the mark or are forced, or
I guess what I am implicitly doing is maybe a similar but slightly different take on Lo Sakal Cheresh is like when you speak just for speaking's sake. There isn't even an audience to your criticism. Like I said, I was really taken by what Rabbi Popko said about Nasib Am Chalosor, which is the comment of the Torah's Kohanim cited by not just the Bechor Shor, but other Mefarshim as well. And just thinking about this Ibn Ezra, about how power corrupts in that kind of way, not just in the receiving end, but on the giving end also.
It calls to mind also, I mentioned this in the podcast just recently, that it was Teddy Roosevelt, not FDR, that is the critic who counts, the man in the arena. And this idea of lo sikal el cherish can be, I think you're essentially saying this, Rabbi Block. It's easy to be a critic, right? It's easy to curse, to call out those who can't respond because they're either not there or they're not in your conversation. And so you can go off on someone, your Shabbos table, and leaders should be subject to criticism and dialogue, but lo sikal el cherish, you can really go off on someone. They can't defend themselves. The question is, does it really contribute productively to the conversation?
I guess that's the read that I was fishing for, and I think I finally now have, just hearing you talk, Hugo. Lo sakal al cherish could mean not just don't curse the deaf, it's don't curse deafly. That's what it means. That it's okay to criticize, but it needs to be in a way that fosters and that engenders dialogue, and healthy debate is good. But I'm thinking about community leaders, rabbis, public figures who post on Twitter or put up a Facebook post or write a blog or an article in the paper, and then they close off the comment section and you can't even respond. Or even if you can respond. There's no attempt to respond to any of those responses. And it's,
There's responsibilities on both sides.
yeah, in ways that I didn't really even realize till I sat down here to do this episode. It's cultivating. The Torah is maybe in choosing to say lo sakal cheresh rather than just simply lo sakalel. It's actually telling us that it's actually attempting to engender the spirit of conversation and dialogue and healthy debate, which I didn't realize.